So tag, I'm chairing the meeting tonight. I'm mad with power. No, Tom's out of town, works away. So we're just gonna keep things moving along. Thanks for coming. And I don't believe we have any minutes to approve from last week's meeting. I don't know that they came out yet, so we'll probably be at the next meeting. You good? If everybody can silence their phones, just remember to do that, please. And also, we're being recorded, just so you know. This is all going to be. Are you taping?
Yep.
Oh wow. Okay,
It
so.
won't really come out so well.
So we can't talk about people behind their back?
No, not at all. We'll have to do that after the Thirsties, yeah. So anyway, without further ado, do we want to dive in here?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we've got a couple different things to go through with you this evening. Well, as always, we'll give you a quick update on the project status and where we are. Then we'll dive right into the Shane Place concept. Both Chris and Portland from Plan Architectural Studio are here to go through that with you. Hopefully you got a chance to take a look at it when we sent it out last week. Then we'll move into preliminary conversation, just sort of precursory level when talking about residential commercial transition elements. Just something to be thinking about with the context of the Village of Pittsford and what has made it successful before we really dive into the community enhancement strategy itself. And then we'll follow up with the next steps. So where we are in the timeline process, we are at the draft community enhancement strategy and Shane Place sub-area plan meeting. If you notice, last time we talked about this as a future land use summary and a future land use map, but as we got into it and as I noted in the email, it started to make more sense that it reads less like a future land use summary and more like a community development, or in this case we purposefully chose the term enhancement strategy. A big reason for that being that since we do have the advantage of focusing on the code at the same time as the plan update, a lot of the stuff that you would traditionally see in a future land use section, like recommendations for zoning code edits, it's very temporary in that it would be included in the document since we can, have the option to do that now. So we decided that it would take a different approach that provides, I think, hopefully a little bit more direction and guidance from a future development or preservation enhancement strategy, not necessarily this to-do list of things in the code that need to be done. So we're keeping track of all those code elements as we go along and how that's going to impact the framework. We do have a meeting with the village board this weekend that we will be going through the draft zoning district framework, reflecting a lot of what has shown in the enhancement strategy with them and incorporating some of what we hear tonight.
When is that? When is the meeting?
On Saturday?
Oh.
Yeah.
It's a code review meeting. It's yes. I can't remember. Does it start at 9 o'clock?
Yeah, 9
to noon.
It starts with 9 to noon?
9 to noon.
Right here.
Yep.
That should be posted also.
And a quick question on that, and I apologize if it's out there somewhere on our websites and that, but are we aware of what's been as far as presented and discussed with the trustees and how that goes? Because obviously the land use is tied in with the code.
Yeah.
Not that we have direct input, but it doesn't make sense, and do we understand that?
It's certainly all of those elements and pieces that we've gone through the code are all those meetings and things are posted, the minutes and stuff are available. And then we have the elements that we've gone through currently in the code. The only thing we've touched is review procedures. So
yeah,
it
we
hasn't
haven't talked about land use at all yet.
Code changes.
Yeah.
No, we're not, but
No, they aren't either.
they're not either?
They're talking about the
Okay, not
format or the,
Okay.
Right now, all we've been talking about is structural codes.
Yeah.
Like site plan review and
Oh, right,
that
right.
kind
Okay,
of
review
thing.
process of
Yes.
application.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Versus.
And this will be the first
No
time that
specific
there's
codes.
any
Land-
intermingling of land use and future
Specific code,
code,
district codes,
right, and we're
uses,
still
et
not
cetera.
talking about codes
Gotcha,
at
thank you.
all.
Good.
We're just talking about land use still.
Yep.
So-
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, no, and this was purposely, this by design, this is how we wanted this process to go because ultimately, obviously, we do want your input and feedback on future land use and
Perfect,
what,
thank you.
you know, we're looking to do in the codes.
No,
yes.
right.
I do have one question. You
Yeah.
said we were
This is the
set out
underpinning for the
pre-work
Right,
on
exactly,
the
but the
sub-area plan.
specific
Is that just this
detailed
map?
setbacks,
Yes.
That's all I saw.
restrictions,
Yes, yep.
That's right.
Okay, and so then from here,
I've got one,
tonight,
but-
we'll take your input, you know, some preliminary comments and thoughts that you have on this document tonight. Obviously, we will have, an opportunity to go through this again when we've fleshed it out and, you know, given you the full examples and things as we go through, moving forward. So that'll be probably the focus of our next meeting. And then we're in a good position, with the plan and the code moving into, June for the community open house. So then, and that'll be a really good opportunity and good way for us as a planning exercise to show the relationship between this document, the planning document itself, and actual what would be local law, the draft code update. And we'll move forward with updates from there. So, any other questions on process before we jump? Anything you wanted to know?
No.
No? All right. So with that, we'll get right into the Shane Place.
As long as I'm white.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll give you an obstacle course, you know?
I've read some of the
Yeah,
words.
that's, she,
Yeah.
and she got,
I brought the words.
Beside
Yeah, that you can't read.
too large, and enlarged what you have on your map.
Those words that are there.
I like this.
Even if that was there, it's at the bottom of it.
And
Well, that's
That's
just
all
nice.
right.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just so you know, Jan's passing out all the tiny, yeah. And I brought this in case anybody else.
Oh, is that this little thing
Yeah,
over here?
yeah, Jan,
That's this little thing over here. I
Thanks,
was
Jan.
able
Oh, I didn't see that. I was
to
looking
bring
at
it.
the same.
So
It's
there's,
there.
all of that was a guess.
so there's, yeah, go ahead.
Just one quick question
Hang on, we have a question on the,
before we get into the map, the whole community enhancement strategy, and I apologize, I was out of town, I didn't have language, but in there, just as a general question, is there, I think, the question about bringing in language about how the intermingling of residential, commercial offices together in harmony with consideration of the various impacts of
Mhm.
each? That's just a question, maybe somehow bring language into that
Okay.
section up front.
are we gonna be going through this after? this?
Yes,
Yeah,
we're
okay, so
starting
we'll
with
be
the-
getting to
yes.
that. Yeah, I think we're just opening.
That's
it
okay.
up.
Yeah,
You're
and
ahead of the curve.
maybe we should
I said I
provide.
started with page one.
Actually, we probably should provide just a little bit more context for you on how these two things relate together. There's clearly an approach that we have to the community enhancement strategy areas in the actual plan itself. So identifying them where they are, how they exist today, or how they are, you know, envisioned to exist at some point in time. Then stating the different approaches that are in there, whether through the T&D principles, traditional neighborhood design principles, or the Secretary of Interior standards, how they're applied. And then and you'll see there's a couple examples in there, as I noted in the email, of how you know, we envision the various design typologies and potential redevelopment or infill opportunities might look, or preservation opportunities might look in each of those areas. So what this means for the Shane Place sub-area plan is that this will be a very specific and prescriptive approach to that typology, and that'll be plugged into, obviously, the Shane Place Northfield Commons area in the plan. So this will be the one spot where you'll see a significant more amount of detail based on this conversation and these graphics.
And it can serve as a template for other areas if, you know, as the village moves forward. Northwest Quadrant, if that becomes a recreational type area, clearly the common village doing some type of master plan makes sense going forward at some point in the future. Don't hit your head.
Okay, yeah. So, go ahead.
Yeah.
So there's a lot here, a lot of text. But what I'd like to do is give an overview of the reactions from the public meeting and what revisions have been made to this plan since the last time we've met. The last time we met, we had a very healthy discussion about the different concepts. This was the one that we decided to roll out to the public. We got a lot of, I think, positive feedback, some interesting discussions over that period. and Cortland's updated this plan to represent the input that we received. So I'm going to briefly go through kind of the plan at this point, and then start to talk about potential uses of the particular zone, what we're calling Zone 5, which is the 35 Shane Place property, and then maybe talk about the next step for this plan from a illustration standpoint. So starting kind of at the northwest corner, one of the, actually a couple of people talked about the potential for infill where it makes sense. So one of those areas could be this parking space here, a parking area here. Right now we're just showing a box there, but it could be a building. Ideally it would be addressing Shane Place, so up to the street. It probably pulled down a little bit from what it's shown graphically to allow for a sidewalk along Shane Place, but also allow for opportunities to the south for gathering seating space adjacent to the canal. So that would be an idea of an infill. For the most part, the remainder of the sub area, other than this target area, Zone 5, at this point there wasn't much discussion about any other potential infill sites. There was a lot of discussion about the circulation, this idea of this potential loop. And most of the discussion was obviously focused on this area, the sub-area plan. Before I get to that, one other discussion that was interesting was the idea of providing straightforward pedestrian connections from the residential neighborhoods to Shane Place. There was discussion about maybe along the canal in this area. We looked into that. Because there's residential properties here that abut the canal, it's a challenge. There may be in the future potential for, this is pie in the sky, I think, but a connection across the canal down at the park, which is down here, which would get you to the path side, to this side of the canal, and that would serve as a connection to the rest of the village, residential. But at this point, we're really just showing maybe using South Street and the crosswalks that connect over as more of a logical wayfinding from the residential areas to connect to the Shane Place sub-area.
So you're saying South Street and State Street?
South Street, essentially, yeah, and then using these crosswalks or enhancing the crosswalks that exist. Now, this plays in even more importantly if something like a pedestrian bridge were to be envisioned in the future from the parking lot behind the library across. Really makes South Street, I think, a logical collector for the neighborhood, the residential neighborhoods in this part of the village. So that's kind of the bigger picture circulation and larger sub-area concepts. When we get closer to Zone 5, there was discussion about use, mixed use, residential, all that kind of discussion. And it seemed like the direction was towards more of a horizontal mixed use, and meaning that if you look at this site, as opposed to vertical mixed use, first floor being maybe commercial, second floor being residential, that perhaps a horizontal mixed use as you go from this section more of a retail commercial, potentially office as well, and as you moved towards the northeast of the site, across the easement, across the former rail easement, would be more potentially residential. Now that could be multifamily residential, it could be boutique hotel, but at this point we're not getting any further than that. But the idea of this horizontal mixed use for that site is what was discussed. Another important, I think, discussion was how these buildings get treated. Obviously, the existing footprints we talked about, respecting those existing footprints, those existing buildings in place as best possible. Now, I want to get some more guidance from Bob as to the exact, get more detail on which pieces of this complex are the most sacred, and get that moralized into this document, get more detail. But the idea that these beautiful buildings could create an exterior plaza, so essentially an outdoor room that could also serve, similar to like this image is kind of showing, that creates kind of a gathering space. It's what's nice about it. It's central to the sub area, so it almost becomes a gathering space for the whole for all of Shane Place, and that in also along with the idea of potentially having an area that where Shane Place could be temporarily closed down for festival-like activities that would then connect this plaza to the canal in a very central manner. So that's that idea. That's that idea. And then as you move northeast, maybe more of agrarian architecture. These are more, these are agrarian, but they're more mill-like, and potentially the interior of the original buildings could be more like a market space with smaller vendors, where you actually experience the entire structure on the inside when you come into it, as opposed to being chopped up into separate, a lot of walls, more of an open market type feel, more like think about maybe Village Gate, where you have commercial retail on the lower level and perhaps office or artist studios on the upper level. So I think that might be more appropriate for these. And then, as we mentioned, potential residential, which we'll explore some more detail with that as we move ahead.
Can you help me just understand the big picture, the circulation, not clear, and the new roadway, that green space you talked about for festivals, is that still roadway? Actually?
Yes, it's still Shane Place as it exists. It's really more of a seasonal. I don't know if you've been to Geneva, Linden Street, where they close Linden Street down on the weekends.
Okay.
It's
I wasn't sure
a
about
public
the
road.
coloring of it,
Yep.
if it was-
No, it would. But what happens is, by having this loop more formalized, it allows you to do that and not cause havoc from a
Is this
vehicular
two-way
standpoint.
traffic though, all the way around?
I think, yeah, two-way, yeah. Mhm.
That's what
But
I
it
was
only
trying to
goes one direction, right, out toward
say. No, it's two ways
Main Street.
everywhere.
It would be.
Only goes one way.
This would be
Same
this
way.
would be a two-way road. It's more of an access road.
So a two-way road that comes out right in front of where
Can you
all
just
is.
really
Yeah.
show it, just really go through it?
So
just
this
people
is
are
Northfield.
very, very clear.
So yeah, Northfield Commons. This is where it's on the tighter side, obviously, and then it would follow the easement.
And
and
that's all two-way.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
what.
You don't own anything.
Ideally, it would be
None of that
two-way.
property is
Yeah.
changed.
Two-way, and it will go between the buildings that are in Northfield Commons, right?
Correct.
And it comes out right by the houses.
Where the
out there on
existing
State
drive is
Street.
here. That's an existing drive at this
That's where
point.
you enter anyway.
Yep.
In Northfield, into
Yep.
Northfield.
Yeah.
It goes down the hill.
Right next to the houses is where it's
Well,
going
that's
to come out.
Northfield Commons.
Yeah, there's an office, I believe, here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a two-way
Yeah.
road that goes from State Street past Olives, between the buildings at Northfield Commons,
Mhm.
behind them, and then goes clear up toward, I think, Cole Tower, and
Correct.
comes out.
Beyond the office building and
it's all
then back in.
vehicular. It's a.
It comes
it's a
back
two-way
out
road.
between the silo and the coal tower.
You got it.
Which
Well,
is,
and the nature of that facility might be more interconnected space. It may be a former road. It could be on-street parking. It could be the nature of that road is to be determined.
Mhm.
Right.
We're not saying run a formal curb two-lane road through Northfield Commons. That would be
Well, why do you say we need that road? Is it because of those buildings that are behind?
Well,
Those three large buildings that are
It's-
right?
You know,
So-
let me, can I just jump in, because I'm understanding it differently. That's why,
Yeah,
I see this as a tremendous opportunity with something that literally already exists,
yes.
and simply will be a little more formalized in
Yes.
terms of how it's used. It already exists, so, because we've had all that feedback about, access to the canal and the amenities and how can we engage people more directly with the canal, I think this particular formalizing a little bit of how the automobiles go allow for greater pedestrian accessibility,
Mhm.
bikeability, as you say, maybe, festivals, seasonal, I just think you're taking kind of what already exists and saying, you know, it's already kind of here, let's just build on this a little
Well,
bit.
and
That's
to
my
that-
takeaway,
We
guys.
don't have a two-way road there right now.
Yeah, we don't own any, the village owns none of that land, it's private property the entire way.
Right, it's a mix of pavement, it's a mix of gravel.
It's not a
Usually
road,
the art-
two-way road right now.
Well, I've used
Well,
it.
I think what you're saying is there's the ability
There's
to
the
travel
ability to
back
do
and
that,
forth
is the
with,
RG&E right of way, which
with
we use.
with the gravel right
We'll have a one-year
with the
lease.
one.
Well,
and that's
I mean, it's
where-
up to the village
We
trustees.
can't go pave over their easement.
I don't think anybody's talking about paving yet, I think we're conceptualizing.
I think we're just conceptually, because ultimately it might be possible if RGE allows it. And then the thought was too, maybe somehow, not to get into too much details here, not only traffic, but pedestrian as well as automobiles coming and going. But, so that's understood, but why limit it just to the automobiles? Why not possibly, depending on the width, because I think it's a
Oh,
40
certainly.
40-foot
Yeah,
right of way.
Certainly.
But
And
that's
I-
just a quick thought.
Yeah.
Yes, no, certainly, and I think like John's saying, you know, the actual nature, right, the cross section of what that road looks
Right,
like
exactly.
could be determined as that opportunity
Exactly,
comes forward. I think the big thing to take note of here is that is an access drive, whether, you know, it's advertised that way or not.
It's you.
There's an opportunity to formalize that in a way that then creates more predictability for
Right.
all users.
Right,
So
okay.
you know, as a pedestrian, where cars are supposed to be, or where I'm able to walk, where those connections are, if there's dedicated space for me and vehicles. So it ends up creating a safer space and a space that does allow for the movement of various forms of transportation.
And it's
And
fun
as far as
Place.
pedestrians, you can actually make it more attractive, because on the northern side, you can actually have a tree line where there's a major berm there, if you will, with a lot of scrub. I mean, you're again, so there's the opportunity. Real quick, if I might, as far as these photos, these are nice, I know the intent, but I was just wondering, as you made reference to Village Gate, which shows the buildings and then the gateway and then
The plaza
the
there.
courtyard,
Yep.
if you will.
That's a
Maybe in lieu of something like
Sure.
this, maybe Village
that's
Gate
great
and
idea.
possibly the
People will recognize
artworks where you have an interior, a
Yep.
a reuse of a building that's, looks like
Sure.
a big warehouse.
Yep.
So people can
Make it
relate
more
to what
local,
you're
yeah.
talking. Exactly.
Sure, those are great examples.
Yeah, just to wrap up on what Molly said on the road, I can see a lot of different options for that road. I could see it being an intimate alley. I could see it being a complete street with sidewalks and on-street parking. I could see on-street parking on one side. I could see it on two sides. You really have a lot of cool options with that facility, whatever it ends up being.
I think another thing to consider is the section that is the easement to perhaps somehow demark it as the former railroad, which connects it back to the history and why some of these buildings actually exist where they do, and connection with the railroad. So I think somehow, whether it's through signage, markers, maybe it's the way it's paved, if it's paved, can mark that history of the railroad, of the rail coming through there. I think that adds another layer, an important layer to Shane Place.
And we also have the Auburn Line Pocket Park at the end there
Yep.
on Main, so, you know, there is,
They tie it in.
it'll
But it
pull
does,
it in.
it does look like you're putting the road in because those three large buildings right behind there will need to be able to get out to the road.
It would certainly
Whether
facilitate
they're
that.
residential or a boutique hotel,
Well,
or whatever
if-
they are, if you didn't have those buildings could not get out to the road.
If that area is developed, they're going to need to have vehicular access to that. If that area is developed, there needs to be vehicles that can
If
access
it's
it.
never developed, we have a road.
Right.
Right.
Well,
I mean, I don't know
the
that it's dependent on the
alternative is-
buildings, am I
The
correct?
alternative is in the idea that one of the things that we heard a lot is trying to connect Shane Place to the canal more.
Right.
And if we can reduce the emphasis on vehicular access adjacent to the canal, then we provide an opportunity for that to be reclaimed space for pedestrians and for the public
Right.
versus
And you've just incorporated the reality that is zoned for development if the owner wants to do
Yeah.
it. So you're saying, okay, that's fine, let's assume it, we don't know the arrangement, but here you go. This is it, and this is how it can blend with everything else.
And even if it's just parking, let's
Right.
say here, the ideas of traditional neighborhood design, ideally we want parking to the north. We want parking behind the buildings, not on Shane Place. So we want to provide, logical access to that parking that's with wayfinding. And this provides that logical access to where we want people to park or find parking spaces, which is kind of more to the northeast behind the buildings. So that's
And I'm sorry, one real
Yeah.
quick thing, I don't want to get too much in format, but this is a nice plan, just wondering though, could there be supplemental, maybe it's in here, or plan to ultimately, each zone have their own sheet, so you can be
Yeah.
more.
So
legible?
we're gonna
Yeah.
we're
I
gonna
figured
get to
you're right.
that.
Yeah.
We're really gonna focus on
Yeah,
this
I
zone,
just-
and that's that's the next step. We really wanted to get everybody's feedback today, and then dive into that. One other I thought really interesting idea. There's this. Is it a co-work in this building that's being developed? A co-work office space
It's fallen through.
falling through.
But that,
Okay.
that's the old ice cream.
Right. I mean, we had a
That's-
discussion about that. I think there's still good opportunities for that. I think there'd be synergy with what happens here with that. Another discussion was how do we get a better connection to Northfield Commons? So one thought would be there was a discussion about, for lack of better terms, a small kind of marker or central focal point feature in the center of that parking corral. But maybe there's a pedestrian connection or a visual connection that connects this central plaza to that and creates a pedestrian link so that it gives whatever happens here, which I think could be very
You're
dramatic.
saying to cut through between where the barns
See the little
are?
green line here?
Yeah.
So maybe,
Is that a retention pond?
Yes.
It's a retention
You'd have
pond.
to
We need a
bridge
bridge,
it.
we need a little
Bridge.
cute footbridge.
It's a little
What are you
footbridge.
doing?
or maybe it's a visual connection,
Yeah,
but
so one-lane bridge.
because we're talking about maybe some really exciting things happening here, there was just a lot of discussion about how do we get more attention to Northfield Commons and
So we
how
wouldn't
Yeah.
have a public market there anymore.
You're pointing to the green space in
Why
the
not?
center, though, aren't
that'd
you?
be a great place. Yeah.
Perfect, yeah.
I thought you said you wanted to put a monument there.
No, no. I mean, just it'd be like maybe a marker, just a marker. So it would be centralized. Think of
Wayfinding.
Geneseo. Think of
Yeah,
Main
they
Street
also-
Geneseo.
That detention facility would be
What
nice.
was that?
It would support the market.
It would
Yeah.
support the market really.
It's
cut through.
accessibility.
All the
We-
pedestrian little fingers that you did would support that type of engagement.
And it
whether
may
it's
not
a
be-
market or a festival.
It may not just be that, but just thinking of things that help connect Northfield Commons to the rest of Shane Place, because right now it's kind of orphaned off in the corner. So,
Talk to me about view shed.
okay.
I know there's a requirement that we have, because of the town buying the development rights and so on, that you have a view to the agrarian area of the farm. I'm not quite sure how that would work with this.
Well, we can control that with,
Your site.
site plan, elevation, that kind of thing.
It says there's going to be a big berm of a lot of trees behind those buildings and, I can't remember.
We don't know if
what it
there's
said.
gonna be, we don't know what's gonna be there.
Know
We
what
just
they're
know it could
recommending.
potentially be developed.
Oh, I think the question is where you have zone 5 and that
Yeah.
green space, what you have called out up there.
It
What's
doesn't
it
Just
look like
buffer,
view shed.
a buffer.
Yeah, did you say a hedgerow or something?
Yeah, it would just be
You said
trees, I
like a
think.
hedgerow.
Trees.
Just similar to what the other field,
Maybe
like similar to this kind of,
Maybe the language to
Yeah.
help the general just keep it the greens.
Yeah,
Screening
green
and
space.
we weren't envisioning
I wouldn't
anything
even say
vertical.
screen, maybe
Just,
just a green space for now.
yeah, and I would imagine it would kind of match the vegetation that's in the fields.
Green space is pretty open and it leaves the village and everybody long term in your consideration of viewpoint of the back. That leaves it open, but that's a thought for you if there's other language.
Well, you wrote hedgerow in the plan and it says vegetation buffer zone.
But do you really want a buffer? I think getting
Trees,
back,
so
do you
you
want
can't
it
see it?
visible?
Well, I don't know, I mean, I'm just saying,
Well,
what's
yeah, I
this
mean-
there now? Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, maybe that's green space,
Yeah.
keeps it open.
Okay.
And we know, not necessarily a buffer,
Mhm.
blocking view, if that's the intent, so it just
Sure.
covers both
It's
fields.
basically gonna be a parking area, most likely.
yeah, and that's the concern. So if it is
Yeah.
parking, then buffer may be more.
It might be,
More
but that's a site
important,
plan, it's a site.
Yeah.
We just don't know.
That's a good point. I mean, as we get into this more detail, the next level, we want to talk a little bit about the more illustrative we get, the more things seem real, even though they're still conceptual. So there's kind of a double-edged sword. We want to show the public and potential developers what we envision would be appropriate. At the same time, we don't want to say this is what is going to happen. So it's you're kind of tight
Do you
roping.
want the Batavia one? Or
Let's
the
show
other
the
one?
let's show the Batavia one. Yeah.
I got them both.
So Cortland put this rendering together. This is more for style. This is an existing. So if you know Batavia, Main Street is actually down here. This is the mall, and this is a parking lot behind the mall where they're conceiving potentially putting a new public market in the parking lot. The hospital's right here, and then these are like office hospital buildings around here, and then the surrounding neighborhood. So this shows kind of just the existing context is more just grayed out, just simple, just for massing, and then the focus area is more illustrated, just to show contrast of how conceptually something like this could fit into the context. So style-wise, we're thinking something like this for Shane Place, focused on that particular Zone 5, to kind of give an aerial view, give some massing, give a little more information that we all can react to, that we can all understand, communicate better with the public and potential developers. At the same time, when you look at this, the other edge of the sword is, this is what's going to happen here. So it's a useful tool. It can be a little bit scary for some people. So I thought having a discussion about that, or exactly what we felt was a good way to communicate the next step of Shane Place. We thought this may be an important tool for the village.
We love this kind of level of detail, especially to show as precedent for other plans that could be done around the village. I think this is appropriate, but if it ends up, as Chris said, the downside is people start to say, that's what's going to happen there.
So I think at this point, everything you said I think you're leading to, do we want something like this incorporated in here or just leave it alone? My general sense, weighing everything you've said, 60-40, leave it alone. This is great, but maybe down the line something comes in. But initially it's the big, let's keep it 10,000 feet. Yeah, that's my personal opinion of everybody else. Because if people don't understand the high level, there's no sense getting into the details. You want to start with the high level first. And then you're going to draw, because a lot of people may not get as involved as we think they will. It's because we're so close to it. They might not even get that close, so why introduce it?
Sure.
That's just my...
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a bias either way. And what I've seen, the exciting things about things like this is that if you do want to garner development interest, concepts like this get excitement, because then people say, I could see something, maybe not this, but I could see something happening here. So if you that may not be what you want,
but the flip side is two things. Number one, I agree with you on both sides, because I can go back and forth too. But just real quickly, not to get too carried on the deep discussion, but number one, so the question is, who's going to come up with the scheme that satisfies everybody to present, short of the landowners possibly getting their consultants into this and giving you that recommendation at this point as a possible concept, just because we had the representatives there at that meeting that we were speaking to.
They
So,
were definitely there.
Do you
Yep.
open
Oh,
it
yeah,
to them?
Andy
Now's
was
the
there,
time if you want. Give a broad brush. It could be, general. But if you're interested in bringing something out and sharing it, my guess is the landowner won't. I'm sure the consultant would love to do that and understand where you're coming from. And I think we would like it, but I don't know if that's gonna happen.
interesting.
Because now you're back to, if they don't want to do it, who's going to do it? And then that's problematic. If I was the landowner's point of view, you're trying to market something that I have no input in.
But if you leave it too high a level,
Yeah.
then anything goes.
Right, and
Because
that's
we haven't-
that's what's
that's a great point.
And that's what's going to happen
But
if you don't.
that's what this
This-
is.
that's- this
is what will happen.
That is more abstract. Certainly,
Yeah.
it's more abstract.
But
So
we're
it's
supposed to be abstract.
No,
at
we're
this point.
supposed to set some
yes and no.
guidelines on what we would like to have, and if you leave it completely open, then you know what you'll get.
That comes down to the zoning district decides the specifics.
The
in
zoning
general,
is going to come from what we give them here. This is going to be the guiding light for zoning.
as far as
Yeah.
land
And if
use,
we don't
but not
give them-
details. It's land use, not details, not code, is what we're dealing with.
Well, then, let's pull a lens way back. Let's take a look at the plan, the earlier plan, where there was the detail of how this pedestrian bridge is gonna look, and we're hooking, at some point you kind of plant your flag a little bit about, this is kind of really where we see the opportunities. Again, it may be a greater level of detail, doesn't mean anybody has to do it, but it at least shows that the community is on board with something. We're on board with something good happening.
But that's
We're
what you have
looking at
here.
this.
Or I
I
would say
get
though,
that,
a
but-
lot of, we think that way. We think in plan.
But
I
not
think-
everybody does.
I think a lot of
yeah.
people
Yeah.
find that is just
Very abstract.
gibberish,
Yep.
because it's all these squares and rectangles.
Yeah.
Whereas,
Yeah, I-
whereas this can say, oh, now I'm starting to, I know how that,
Imagination.
yeah.
I mean, you could even put that in our plan, just to say, this is an example of another community,
Yeah,
you know, just to give
That I
them.
agree with
Would
as
it-
far as an example, but not specific to the site. Here's another situation that kind of takes a parking lot area, open area, existing building areas. This is what can be done, but not literally show it on a plan like this.
So,
I think you-
If you don't put
yeah, so
boundaries
for
around it.
Hang on,
example,
Molly's talking.
for the example, the way that the community enhancement strategy is now, with the examples of the typologies that are in there, right? Those are generally either existing or an example of something that would be desirable and shows some of those specifics of what you might be amenable to in the future. If we use similar language, but we have the ability in the context of Shane Place to actually show what that might look like, but the narrative says, this is an example. This is utilizing these design elements that we feel are priority for this area. Doesn't mean it needs to look exactly like this. We know that it might not look exactly like this, but that's kind of, so it's very clear it's more illustrative.
We're not giving a developer anything to build. You know, in other words, we're using an example of Village Gate to show
Sure.
this is a possibility. I mean, I
agree.
hear where you're coming from, but I mean, I don't really have a problem with saying,
Go the other way then.
you know,
I-
there's some,
that's why I
there's
say
some
that.
visual
I
aids, you know.
live with it,
Can I say
depending on what-
something?
Yeah,
which one
Amy
the
has
idea
the
is.
floor, please.
I think, I'm just gonna guess that the mayor would just love the opportunity to illustrate this as an ideal. And he has the, you know, the ability to do that. I'm just saying, it's imaginative, it's it's creating something that, as you said, can spark your imagination, you know, whoever is reading the document, and whether that's a developer or somebody.
Well, a resident.
But if there's something that you do not want to happen, and you don't mention that that's where the boundary is.
Well, we shouldn't show anything that we do not want to happen.
We don't want the casino.
We should not show anything. Yeah, I mean, really,
I
I
don't want
mean,
the casino there, I don't want a five-story hotel, I don't want a lot of things that
But
if we
also
don't
zoning
specify-
reflects that when
Well,
it's what's,
and I was gonna say a lot. This is where where what normally or typically you would see as a part of this plan, without looking at a zoning code at the same time, we would say, you know, max building height, those things. We'll still have language in there to that effect, but we're taking that feedback that we have from you now, and that's actually going to be the framework of the code. So how it looks, how it feels, how you interact with it as a
Yeah.
person, how it relates to neighborhoods, that's going to be dealt with and in a really great way as part of the plan. But the specifics that says no casinos are allowed,
no 10-story building.
right, no 10-story
Yeah.
buildings, all of those specifics that basically create the use and the shape of this in the future will be handled in the code.
So with all that said, and I get the general sense here on this side, not a lot of talking here, but that your preference is to prevent, would you then, if everybody agrees, then present an example of what you want beyond what we have here?
At least for discussion.
I mean,
I think it'd be
a lot of
helpful.
it.
I mean, to me, it's more of a modern version of what the hand sketches were in the previous.
And maybe
comp
that's it,
plan.
a
Yeah,
nice
that's
hand
good.
sketch
That's a
would be
good
nice,
point.
because it's really, that whole
Right.
sketching thing looks good, and it's not as firm as this.
The thing
But
is, the
it draws your
computer
attention.
looks less sketchy, so that's why I wanted to bring it. This is a great discussion, by the
But
way,
then
and
you you probably have a computer program that makes it look sketchy, because they're all
you
there.
can, or we can do things so it's not so hyper real as this. So, Cortland, you want to talk about some?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely ways you can make it look super conceptual, and that nobody would believe this to be like a,
And finding that right line of it, so it's believable, it's understandable. At the same time, it's not set in stone. We'll try to strike that right balance.
But we are talking about something like this being on this plan, on the other side, where those buildings are, where these
We go
three
back.
buildings are right here that have the access road right in front of them.
So yeah, we're kind of
That's what you're
defining
talking about, basically.
existing. It will be the existing buildings that are in question, and then potential new development. And we could actually shade those differently. Like the existing buildings could be more opaque, And the potential development could be more translucent, so it even gives that even more of a
Right.
ethereal kind of look and less set in stone. So
Because we don't know what's gonna happen there.
we don't. So
Yeah.
I think making these look more realistic because they're there, and then these looking more, fuzzy
Yeah,
because they're
yeah.
not there, is a good way to kind of present
Yeah,
it.
excuse me, Peggy and then Susan.
Okay. I'm just wondering if in that zone 5 where the 3 new buildings are,
Mhm.
can we dictate that that be residential? Is there a way that we can do that?
Yeah,
Sure, we can
absolutely.
zone it.
Well, what's the current zoning?
In the,
Right now it's B4, but in B4 is over the whole, it doesn't matter what the current zoning is, in my
So-
opinion.
so this is maybe one step too far.
Yeah.
Needs to go without, but with how they're gonna relate to each other,
Yeah.
but anything that happens there is more than likely
That's
going to happen in the context of a plan development or
Right.
some other
Right,
tool.
Yep.
right.
And so that's where dictating things like this area through the plan is for residential use is gonna be important to guide that
So
development review
now,
process.
because this is undeveloped land, we can actually, during our planning process, we can actually say what we want here is residences, even though that might not be the highest, best use of that
Is that
parcel,
village-owned
which
land?
is a separate parcel. It's still a separate parcel from, it's never been subdivided, so it's still part of the,
Now,
But zoning
my
mixed use,
question
what
to
would we
you
choose?
with that would
It's in the
be,
village.
But it's
are
not.
we saying, so there's a difference
Power
between in the
zone.
plan saying, we would like this to be residential, or versus saying, we would not entertain anything else other than residential?
Well, that's,
Because there's two
Yeah.
different ways that you say that in the
Yeah.
plan.
It seems like where we are is that the consensus would be mixed use, and from our exercises so far, it seems like the horizontal mixed use makes sense. That's not saying that somebody may come in and make these buildings work for residential. I don't know that.
I
So-
think we're talking about the 3 buildings.
talking about
These.
The project-
Oh, so
Yeah,
not the
the
whole,
new one.
not the whole, not the whole site,
No.
but
No,
really just that one
just
area.
that one
Interesting.
area. And can we dictate that,
Hmm.
or?
Okay, Susan had wanted to say something.
No, I just think that this is our opportunity to
Just say.
really say what we want.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the more specific we can be, the better. I mean, and this, our code is going to work off of this, so I don't want us to kind of back away from this mode.
which
I
gets
agree
into
with
the
that.
bigger question too, is obviously we have our input, but then what does the community say?
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
well, yeah, that'll happen.
Sure. It's input from as many people as we can get, really.
Where is the village boundaries up there?
That was my question, where those unbuilt buildings are, because it was pulled out
That's
of,
in the village.
It's in the
it's
all in
all,
the
so
village.
all of it.
It's the village boundary sort of this box.
So is
It
the
kinda
Okay,
is.
so it's all,
kinda-
okay, just so
sort
I'm
of
clear. I
That
just
whole
wanted to.
parcel is in the
Yeah,
village.
okay.
It's a
Farther
straight
down,
line.
farther east, is another parcel owned by the Powers that is in the town.
That's the one I was thinking.
So there's
Yeah,
one
because they
parcel
wanna do
here
it.
and one
It's
parcel
down State Street.
farther down State Street.
Yeah, if I
It
look
actually
here,
does stay.
Well, knowing that, though, that means that if all that property in the boundaries and outside the boundaries, you could have a way for buildings back there to have
Yeah, where?
access out beyond the village boundaries.
beyond zone 5 line there, you're talking
Oh, I
about?
Instead of
think that
going
was
through
projected
the-
by the powers to
Yeah.
put a road right through,
Right.
coming out
Instead of
between
our
1
road that
and
goes
right
here and
across
goes all
Sunset.
through the
Yeah.
village
Right.
property.
I think, but again, we're spending time right now on something that's a little bit of conjecture, so if we could
Yeah.
Maybe go
Yeah,
back more
really
specifically then if I can.
drill down a little bit.
Cross back in. If you Look on the very last page of what we have, enhancement strategies for this zone. I'm looking at the second item, implement the recommendations of the Shane Place, Northfield Commons suburbia plan. What I'm trying to sort through is how specific that is, or is this a desirable but not dictated? And I'll give you an example. As I look at that roadway and I'm mixed on it, it's something that might be a goal I can't see us tomorrow going out and say we're gonna require easements through all these properties and pave a road. I can see Charlie Fox blocking access. I can see 100 scenarios that might not play out. But if we want to get a different flow, I mean, for example, you talked about parking and traffic. A developer of that parcel where those new buildings are laid out, we might want the roadway going behind them,
Yeah.
accessing parking instead of bisecting that property.
Maybe?
So I guess I'm asking, is this something we're saying, this is where we're gonna put a road?
No.
Or
Mhm.
conceptually, what
saying
we're
that.
really saying is we want to enhance the flow, we want to take away the traffic along the canal. These are our goals. This is an example of what maybe
Yes.
could do it.
Yeah.
You
Is
got
that
it.
kind of where we're going? Not
Yes.
trying to be, this is a plan we have to adopt.
It's not
Right.
prescriptive,
Right.
but it can be descriptive, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you, Susan.
All
Or
right.
maybe you'd want to show both. Maybe you'd want to show this is one way of,
If I were the powers, I
Here's
wouldn't
the
like
other
this
way to
plan. Bisects their property
Yeah.
until we,
Well, that's why the plans for the whole village.
I understand, but until someone comes in,
doesn't look.
we then have the power to say, look, you know, configure it this way. We'd like to get a roadway out of this.
I'm sorry, how does it bisect their property?
I don't understand what
They
you're
could go out
Well,
the
look
other
at
way.
where those three new buildings are and the property behind it.
Right,
Right,
Instead of
say you
trying
want to do
through
something with
campus.
historic buildings, they need access maybe coming in, whatever they put in there. We're
But they would
basically
have to-
putting a roadway through their parcel. It doesn't make it flexible for a developer. We don't know where they're gonna site those buildings, or how many buildings.
So how do we move forward? Because I think we're getting a little bit in a circle, so.
Well, I think what I hear is that we can continue to move, but make sure that everything that we present, it's clear that this is not prescriptive. It's descriptive. It's conceptual to give an idea of what may be an appropriate use. It's not the only appropriate development, but this is something that's born out of the comp plan that, like the other illustrations have been done in the past.
and you're gonna come back with a couple examples
Yeah.
real quick.
Yeah.
Just to
Yeah.
give
Yeah.
people-
And that's not
But I
uncommon
think-
for companies. Oh,
But I
Suzanne.
think it's also fair to
Mhm.
potential developers to know kind of what
Yes.
we
Agreed.
would like.
I would want to see this if I were a developer.
Yeah,
I'd want to
absolutely.
see like the Batavia thing. If I was going to
Right.
develop that land, I
Right.
want to. Oh, this is the thought pattern. It may not be
That's
exactly
right.
that, but here's some of the
Right.
thinking
Here's how it fits within.
Right.
that you can
Right.
extract from that. And that, like you said, this drive may not work exactly like that, but they're the idea is that you're
That's why I don't want this
connecting.
statement to be misunderstood, that this is where
Yeah.
we're going to put a road.
But see,
Your
that
thoughts?
road can be there if nothing's never built. In other words, I don't know why we're predicating that road there based on buildings potentially being built.
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't,
right,
you
yeah.
know, in other words, I think it stands on its own merit in
Right.
terms of how, by doing that, we create another level of pedestrian access and public gathering that we've never had.
Now,
Yeah.
the one thing I would add to this too, though, to keep in mind is that that area of that parcel of the farm has been set aside for development. So it is expected to be developed at some point. So my guess would be to make that happen, we have to facilitate a connection in some way. And this plan is ultimately saying, look, we know that we need to provide that connection. We know that development's going to exist there. We're just helping to frame that context. Is it residential? Is it mixed use? Just are we making sure that the road is including pedestrian amenities, or what is it? Giving some context of what it looks like.
Right. And it achieves some goals along the canal.
Yes,
I mean-
and in sub area
Right.
connections
Still
to the
serving
sub
the
area.
community.
Right.
These are principles that I think moving
Right.
forward you want to hang on to
Right.
with your life. I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
the overarching principles, the exact details may change, but the connections with Shane Place
Yeah.
are important.
And putting in that road maybe just initially does not preclude, and I think Dave made a good point,
Yeah.
that the road could change based on something happening in the future
Hmm.
with the development. That doesn't mean like, well, now that's there now. No,
Right.
you factor that in to the next level of development.
But to Susan's point, the intent here is then to show potential future developers what's expected with the intent. And I think everybody agrees this shows it, it's just a matter of supplemental sketches,
Mm-hmm.
and then.
Yep.
Good, so we're good.
And
Good
we
with
can-
that? Everybody's on it?
Once we're essentially here now, once we're happy, we got to a place we're happy with, we can then soften language,
Yeah.
rather than just saying,
We
we
need
need
to
the plan, we can say, facilitate
Yeah.
I think you
connection.
stated very well the
Yeah.
concept, it gives people an idea, but this is our goal.
Okay. Anything else you like from us, or at this point,
I'm
any
concerned about the
questions?
people that live right out there on State Street with us showing this as a preferred.
Well, personally, as, you look at the residential,
Okay, hang on, Arts has the
in
floor.
answer to Jen's question is, you look at, if you could point out that particular residence from Olives heading due east on State.
No,
So
right
that one,
there.
yep, head right.
State Street,
Keep
go
going.
down where your finger, the
Move your
residential
finger
right
down.
Keep
corner.
coming, all those, they are not directly impacted by this
Right,
design.
no,
That's the beauty of this design.
Why are they not directly impacted?
Because
'Cause-
it's not anywhere close to it. So you come to our backyards,
it's existing.
and then
infrastructure.
at the very southeast end of Northfield Commons, where you have zone, you can't read that.
What is that?
Zone
6,
That
which
back-
is really the
so
residential
basically
area,
from
and
the residential
yep.
to the maintenance barn, to the railroad right of way, which is RGD, to the farm fields. So none of the line work here as far as paths impact from State
Right.
Street through the residents, to their backyards, to the railroad bed, to the fields in the back.
But the development area that's going to bring
That's off to the left.
new
of-
traffic is going to all then come out right onto State Street.
But once
That's
again,
my
that's
concern.
addressed
Yeah, but that's a
through-
matter of traffic
zoning
coming on State
what they
Street.
want.
And Maine, I mean, it gives you connections
That's
to Maine
a
as well.
reality. You're gonna have people come, you're right, you're gonna have cars on State Street, but my guess is, I mean, that's just a function of State Street as a roadway. It is, yeah.
Right.
But
And the
you're not
only-
adding any, you're not impacting the neighbors directly by
right.
introducing new pathways adjacent to, contiguous to, or through
And you're
residential properties.
clearly diverting traffic the other
Correct,
direction.
right.
Okay. We're good? Everybody,
Does that make sense?
great.
I
Next.
don't know, they know they want to develop it.
Moving
We know
moving
the
along
kinds of
here.
Thank you, that was a very good
Thank you.
discussion.
That was really,
Appreciate it.
really
Thank you.
well done.
Yep.
Thank you.
Cars, but what I'm saying is it's not-
Additional
Portland's
plan.
ready to model this out.
Okay, I'll just, of course, there we go.
That's
Great.
any,
Nice job, thank you.
any development, whether it's there or not, you can have, but thanks for the consideration, people slow, it doesn't affect us.
Okay, are we switching over to the,
Getting there.
Okay.
Good. Bob had a good suggestion a meeting or two ago, I don't remember exactly when, and I wish it was here for the discussion, maybe we can redo this on Saturday, because it would help us a little bit as policymakers too. So Katie and I put this together, and it's, you might say duh at the end of this, and I wouldn't be offended if that's how you ended up with this. But
you don't have,
we thought no, you don't have this, no, and we can give you this when we're done. But,
Thank you.
So the idea of one of the things we deal with a lot, as planners, you spend 80% of your time dealing with 20% of the concerns or issues. One of the things we see from place to place to place, and we'll give you some examples in a minute, is we call it it's stress. It's stress between properties, and one of the things that we hear a lot about through residents' concerns are the impacts of commercial activity, not development necessarily, but activity on residential properties. And generally that relationship, that proximity causes stress. I mean, that is one of the inherent reasons why traditional Euclidean zoning came to be in the first place, to say you keep your impacts over there and we're going to keep our impacts over here. So we wanted to just give you kind of a walkthrough of a couple examples in Monroe County, and then have a little discussion about Pittsford. This is Village of Hilton, my hometown, so I can pick on them because I know some of the backstory. So if you know Hilton at all, I don't want to bore you with a ton of pictures, but Main Street's right over here. This is the post office. So once upon a time, this is too much information, but the good part of the story, which isn't as relevant, initially the post office, when they proposed a new post office, was going to be out in the town. So we said no, we did a local development corporation and kept it in downtown. So that is the plus side of the story. That is a good end result. But I want to talk about impact. So you had traditional downtown post office here, You've got, this has been converted to multiple things, was a hair shop and a computer store. This is a single family home still. And you see how this, once that flipped, this became here, you've got a necessary large parking lot here. You see how the character of this street has changed. And clearly the stress on this property has changed. Once upon a time, ESL wanted to buy all of this, and the third parcel down and make a drive-through. So they're gonna demo the whole thing and make a drive-through kiosk in downtown, which we said no to.
How did it affect the value of that house?
Oh, he was very upset that it didn't go through. No, they were going to buy that house. They were
But
buying it all.
now what's the property value of that
I
house?
don't know off the top of my head. I
I
could
mean,
ask,
it'd be interesting just.
yeah, I could ask around.
Not as high as it used to be.
Depends
You
on
know.
the zoning.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So you've got residential, commercial, and then some converted
Mhm.
commercial. You look at the opposite side of the street. You've got downtown. This corner I'll talk about in a second. That used to be a single-family home. All these single-family homes have been flipped. You see this stoop that used to be a stoop is no longer a
No
stoop.
street presence.
Yeah, I mean, the buildings are still there, but they've been butchered and morphed a little bit through multifamily and some other type uses. The corner parcel a few years back was demoed. They built a nice 2-story building in the wrong place, so they built it in the back, parking in front. So these transitional edge properties are always a bone of contention with communities. So in Hilton, we see it. In Honeyway Falls, this is downtown. This structure right here was a pretty decent single-family structure. It might be 2-family, but it's single-family in character. They had a proposal recently for a creperie. So they said, can we put a creperie in there? And the first questions became parking, and then what do you do with the parcel next to it? And at what point do you literally draw the line? One of the old.
Cascade effect.
Bingo.
I'm just thinking of Monroe Avenue, you guys, and Biden from 12 Corners down to
I know.
Highland.
Ruined.
Yep.
What's that about?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the town of Pittsburgh years back wanted to do the same thing for French Road to the village. It'd all be commercial.
The street I live on, Church Street.
Well, the other thing too to note
Commercialist.
with the Honeyway Falls example, ultimately they did say no to that, and one of the reasons being that they do have a lot of vacant spaces on Main Street. So the answer was, we would love for you to invest in Honeyway Falls, but in an appropriate area, an appropriate place.
Those residential structures are cheaper. They're more affordable. It's a low-hanging fruit for someone looking to do a commercial operation. This is Fairport. This is a large parking lot on Pleasant Street, and you can see what this side of the streetscape has become through the introduction of one parking lot and the housing opposite it. Looking local, so we're picking on Webster and Pittsford in this case, so this is you. Kudos to Pittsford. It's one of the few examples where you have commercial activity right next to single family or residential uses. Sometimes like behind here is a 2-family. So when I say single family, I mean smaller residential character type homes they both remain very high quality. Strong commercial in appearance, etc. Strong residential in character. You look at poor Webster, the edge of their downtown, commercial, residential. And unfortunately, there's a lot more examples of this on Google Maps around Monroe County than this.
Well, you also have the ratio of solid to void, the larger windows and the street presence. I mean,
It's traditional, it's proper and appropriate.
But right across the street from that is Church Street, and that's where we are already experiencing creeping commercialism.
Okay, so we want to talk about that when we get into the community. This is why we're doing this. So hold that thought, because that's good, Jan. So we've got coming into the village from Monroe. Now this side, as you know, is a little rougher. You got the fire station and some parking. The streetscape coming in on that side is not quite as scenic. But you've got a nice home here and public parking access, but again, it's dominated by buildings and trees and streetscape, not necessarily asphalt.
Where is that?
That's Messner's on the right.
Yeah,
Oh,
Messner's
oh,
is
And
right
then so
there.
you're just
My
this
apologies.
flash, yeah.
It's kind of hard with all the, you
No, I
got so
know.
many darn trees.
Yeah, too bad.
Webster,
Tree thing.
Webster, similar circumstance. You got a home, parking lot, and soon to be, I think it's a gas station canopy. So again, the transitions are what you want to spend some time on. And Bob was very pleased and proud that over the years, Pittsford has really held the line on that. So as we talk future land use, that's something to keep in mind. Because when you look at, and again, this is really quick for us, we looked at, again, just using Webster as this benchmark in Pittsford. You each have various size parking lots scattered around downtown. So it wasn't like dramatically like, geez, well, Pittsford's are better located or better dispersed, you have
Or
them
have
just,
fewer of them.
yeah, you know, they're kind of
Mhm.
haphazardly, organically have occurred over time. In terms of bars and restaurants, in the downtown, Pittsford has 8, Webster has 7, so, you know, in terms of some land uses that seem to be of a concern, it's comparable. And then the question becomes, is it other things that come into play? You know, is it architectural preservation? Is it landscaping? Is it screening? Is it paying attention to the details? You know, here's Church Street.
All of the above.
Yeah. So the question we want you to think about, and you can need to help us with over time, is Pittsburgh residential building stock is maintained its value and quality even when directly adjacent to commercial uses, which is very hard to do. What are some of the reasons for this? You know, some of the background, and maybe we'll do this again on Saturday,
Okay.
because again, it's just some of the history would help us. So when we talk about, geez, this use might be appropriate for this, or this character might be appropriate for this area, we want you to keep this in mind, because it is a slippery slope. We're not saying you couldn't move lines, but it is a slippery slope. You want to make sure you don't first do no harm type of thing.
So are you going to show us vulnerable areas where this creep might be occurring?
I was going to ask you,
Okay,
because
all right.
Jan mentioned
Yeah.
church.
So maybe we need to identify other areas that might,
Well, simply,
Vulnerable.
where are there transition periods today? I mean, that's just based on.
Maybe just identify all
Not-
those areas.
It's just
Identify
literally, I
them.
mean, here you have commercial, here you have residential today,
Yeah.
or institutional and residential today.
okay.
Just say A, B, C, D, here they all are.
Mhm.
Have pictures, and then you can talk about, okay, A, maybe you wanna have a particular type of uses, B, okay, a little more intense or less intense for B, depending on the specific review of A, B, C, D
Does
areas.
that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
What do you put in the transition areas? I mean,
That's the,
That's the.
you got a parking lot, you got a
Discussion.
fence, you got a residence. How should you be transitioning that?
So, I mean, so the bad answer is there's really no way to dictate that. I mean, it's contextual, and that's from my perception. That's what Pittsburgh has done well, and what Webster hasn't done well at all. Webster is about, you want to be in our main street, cool, go ahead.
Bring it on.
You know, and so that the thought process of the history of that street, the architectural character, all of those things, isn't at the forefront. With Pittsburgh, the way that the downtown area is sort of designated, the way that the neighborhood areas are designated, there hasn't been a lot of that cross. Even though they're adjacent, there's not really anywhere that, you know, I mean, significantly, actually, aside from going north towards Shane Place, there really isn't a lot of blend of residential homes that have now become an office or something like that.
but quick question, you said there isn't there, in fact there is, it's by the code, here again, the specifics of the code, whether it be architectural, I mean, windows, trees, green
Yes.
space, so you can.
Well, you can. So basically, what I'm saying is I think what it comes down to is a twofold approach, and we'll need your input to identify this for the different areas. But identifying where existing residential abuts downtown or those commercial areas, and then stating, all right, what's making it successful and what's not, and ensuring there's more than one way. Like if you go back to this example, I like this for so many reasons, but one is, yes, that's a 2-story, downtown building, but it has the same roof line as a residential structure next door. It shows a similar approach and style to windows and things. So you start to get into those finer grain elements that blend that transition a little bit better. And we can get at that language in the design standards of the code, but we need, because everyone is a visual person, it's very difficult to interpret those things sometimes. We need to use the plan to provide the context with examples like this and say, this is why it was successful.
Right, as well as sketches, you can say, here again, you have it in here, when you have different layouts with green space or whatever, you can carry that over. With roof lines, you have, well, again, that's where you have your exhibits right within this, as well as the narratives in the code.
And there's some areas that, we're challenged by. I mean, the North Main
Sure.
Gateway, we got ideas, but you guys have to tell us what direction to go, because it's kind of a hodgepodge right now. You know, but there's so much, as Molly said, there's so much going on here that's done well. I mean, even the curb radii is an incredibly tight curb radii. You know, so there's a lot of things that we like about this image that we can sprinkle into our community enhancement strategy. We just didn't want to. We tend to layer our information, and we want to make sure you are comfortable with how we're going to package it and how we're presenting it, and then we're going to have you help us layer it.
You missed your chance for tiramisu.
It's not a public meeting, that's why I didn't say it. Do you want me to do the quick intro, or you want to jump into these slides? Kind of.
Whatever you want.
So the community enhancement strategy, and we're excited about this because we've never quite done this before. We've done future land use sections, a lot of them. We've done community development strategies, a lot of them. This is a different animal for us, for all the right reasons. So one, thank you for challenging us. Even the name, like we said, normally we say community development strategy. I think in Pittsford, I think community enhancement strategy might not be the right phrase, but it's a better phrase.
It's much better.
And you're building out what you have rather than starting from square one.
Right.
Perfect.
And if you as a group say, you know what, I think this is even a better term, we had like 4 or 5 terms, and I threw something out and I was like, nope. And she kind of nope. So we were trying to do something a little more provocative, but this is where we ended up.
Can I make one suggestion on the
Please
map?
do.
And maybe this is ridiculous, but what I did is I numbered down that column on the right.
Mm-hmm.
I put numbers in the colored parcels.
Yeah.
So when you see
Oh,
it in
sure.
grayscale, I can
That's
translate it.
Well,
Yeah.
grayscale
Yeah.
just disappears.
Well, that, and when you're talking to it, rather than saying up here, it's like area
One.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Mhm.
or A, B, C, D,
Yeah, that's-
whatever.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, it's a good one.
The other thing that I think would help
We
is
can
if you
figure it
could
out.
see the roads. And when I look at that,
Maybe just to call the main roads.
Yeah,
so
the
we
main
can-
roads.
Oh, the
because-
other option is just in black, have along State
Something.
Street or Main Street, just literally have it, the text
Some of the
there.
labels.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, good suggestions. Very good.
Now,
but
one
again,
thing-
in green, when you try to print it, and some people will be trying to print it, the coloring disappears. So if
That's
you
right.
could cross section area, or put polka dots in it, or.
No, I like the numbering idea too, because to Art's point, we can, in the narrative there are, and you've seen, there are some places where even within the same
Mhm.
character area, we're talking about maybe a little bit of a different approach.
Yeah,
So
you might
the
be
numbering-
talking 1 and 3 versus
It's
4
pretty
and
clean,
5.
too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. That would be good.
Thank you.
I have just one question on the community enhancement strategy map, and I don't know if there is somewhere else in the plan, but in the land use committee we talked a lot about like small areas of green space, like pocket parks, like areas we identified like in front of the Phoenix building where that part of that is owned by the village.
Mm-hmm.
Other places that could be we could collaborate with the town, such as the former, right next to the War Memorial.
Beach Tree.
They can
Yes,
show up on here.
So one of the things that we talked about was the importance of connecting spaces and how these little places help do that. And I don't know if there's any language because it was in our committee, and also the value of public gathering spaces in close to Four Corners in a central area. And on the way, like, here's Copper Beach, here's a linear park that could connect you to, like, the canal path park that nobody knows about because it's hidden back there. So I just, I'm just saying, is there some way that, we could take another look and find a way of, like, maybe, bringing up some of these
Yes.
other ideas?
That is exactly what. That is a great example of stuff that currently is missing.
Couldn't you have
so is
green
And that's
all
by
across?
design. That's exactly. I'm gonna come back to that at least twice in the next hour.
I couldn't tell where the high school is, but Lone Woods is there somewhere.
There's the track, the running track.
Right,
And
where's Lone Woods? It's in the village.
It's-
No.
Part of it's
But it'd be,
in,
Part of it
it'd
is
be
in
behind the,
Boston.
right where you pointed to the track, that brownish area,
Oh, right here.
down.
no, the
No,
other side.
right down,
right,
that
yeah,
brownish right in
there.
there. That's all around
Old
woods.
growth forest, et cetera.
Yeah.
And the pocket parks, the one on
Yeah,
where the
I mean,
beech tree was,
there's
several.
there's a lot of potential to connect spaces, public
Yeah.
spaces, and add and enhance what we have. So
And that's great, because you said you're gonna be addressing some of
Yeah,
them.
when we talk
Okay.
community enhancement strategies,
Yeah.
that's exactly what we want.
Okay.
I mean,
That's
that
good.
name, whatever Woods you just called that,
Yeah,
Lone
I would.
Woods.
that's the kind of stuff we want to
Right.
incorporate into this.
And so, also, so this is really a very kind of simple approach, right, in identifying all these different things. So, one, in adding our the street network, we also have an opportunity, I think, to identify, like, you know, there's obviously opportunities for that connectivity along the canal and then between some of those green areas.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things, that next layer that we need you to help us identify, and then we can, you know, that's part of the beauty of a community management strategy versus a future land use, is that in this case now we can say, look, you know, these connections, trails otherwise might not exist, but we are going to say that they, you know, there is an opportunity there. We're not necessarily saying this is where it's going to go. It's going to be through these properties, but
It's
calling
a
attention to
concept.
it.
It's a concept of, like, you know, an ideal. And
Right.
I think that, you know, I know that Elisa and some other, when we were involved in the farmers market, when we first started it, one of the things we did is we actually sat down and we with the town supervisor, and we had kind of the whole layout. He created this, like, schematic, and to talk about how, like, places that, like, empty spaces could be used and connected, and I think that that kind of thing would have to be, like he said, it's a concept, and it would be an ideal thing to collaborate with.
That was around the library, that's what we were talking about.
Right next to the library
Yeah.
lot, right across the
Yeah.
street, really to the right.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful spot. We had a farmers market. We had several events, concerts. It was like a village square for a while.
Okay.
When we had the
It's the
market.
vacant lot right there, diagonally across from the street.
Right.
Got it, thank you.
The other thing that I question on this is that lavender or blue, those blue areas, the one that's
This
by the canal is very different than the two that are up above. So I was surprised that you had them in this,
All right,
in the same group.
let's hold. I hate to turn, let's put a pin in that, because we'll get to that section,
Okay.
section by section. So just as an overview, and we already talked about some of this already, the idea clearly is to provide a framework to fill in all these ideas that were just brought out and then some. So one of the big things we want to get from you tonight is this framework work to plug in, and is it relatable and valuable to you as the reader and the user and the residents of the community. As Molly talked about, it's intended to focus on more than land use, and again, there's been so much talk of the Secretary of Interior standards in Pittsford for all the right reasons. We incorporated that thinking as
Yeah,
well as
that's
traditional
great.
neighborhood
That was
design
really good.
elements.
Yeah.
Thank you
in a-
so
in-
much for doing that.
You're
Yeah.
welcome. And
Well, the whole village is on the National Register,
Right.
and
It's gotta
that
be
is
there.
an underpinning of everything else that's driving all of this, so.
And they're
Thank you.
going to be TND.
traditional neighborhood design elements. Sorry, it's for the slide.
No, that's
Sorry, my fault.
Nobody else will know
No,
what it's
no,
either.
no,
No, it's good.
Planners are notorious for being guilty of
Yeah, that's
acronyms.
good.
And so as we've been talking about, this is our starting point to say, does this framework work for plugging in the ideas? And from what I'm hearing, at least from our point of view, it does, based on everything you just
We're
said.
already tweaking it, it must
Yeah.
work.
So can I?
Yeah,
Yeah.
is there anything else that you need to know?
No, we're
No,
good.
let me here, go ahead, let me change the.
So a couple of things while he's switching that I want to take note of too. I mentioned it in the email, but you'll see the way that the document is laid out and is the same as we did it before. We focused on content in this one rather than spending our time redesigning it so we could get you this draft. But as we move forward with the rest of the stuff, we have your comments from last time and, you know, creating a little bit more of a historic context in the layout. I know it's been mentioned again that the font is too light. This is a black font, so we will just be altering the font.
It's a black.
It's a light font, but it is black, so it will that'll be one of the things as part of the
Down below is
Yeah.
black, that is great.
the redo. That's actually just bold. See,
Oh.
so that's the difference. Is this is that font as light, and this is
We're fine changing, but it is.
Well, again, when you
this
make
is
a
black.
copy of that page,
right. So that being said, understood. All of the
That was
design
black or
things.
black?
We get
That's
it.
better than last time.
You know, sometimes that's the fault of design softwares is there's so many options. It might be just maybe one too many options. So we will incorporate that and make sure that this is a bolder, heavier font moving forward. And we will be updating the strategy itself. We did provide two essentially what would be complete examples of what these sections would look like. That is, I believe, the low and medium density residential areas and the downtown area, I think, is the second, that has the photo arrays that are essentially annotated in some way, shape, or form. And that will continue to evolve, like John said, as we get more input and from you. And this kind of tags on a little bit to our request of you previously for some photos and things. So we're gonna, there's a lot of placeholders in there of Google Photos and Street View and stuff of things that hopefully, if there's nicer weather,
Someday.
yeah, we can get out there and take some of those. But as you're thinking about it, and I'm going to broaden this up a little bit also, maybe there's not great examples in Monroe County, but maybe if you're traveling or places that you are and you see, hey, I like that about that development, take a picture, because showing that to us, and maybe it's not something we put in the plan, but we discuss, that's helpful to us, and we can help build a better, more directive typology with that input. So, be thinking of that and be thinking about, some of those areas and things as you could, and it could be local examples of things, this is what we love about our village, and replicating these elements of that would be successful. So that being said, we have the introduction or preface, I would say, to the community enhancement strategy. And one thing that we wanted to do, and if we didn't use strong enough language, we wanted to make this very clear that this is what the expectation is. So for developers, for property owners, review board members, things like that, we're setting the standard through the design guidance and language that's in here, the pictorial examples, things like that. So we try to use stronger language, like that's down in the second or last paragraph there, in moving forward, so that we're hopefully not prescribing the context of each of these areas, but we are providing essentially what are the examples of. Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead,
I was just going to say, going back to in the last paragraph where
Yes.
it says for Pittsburgh,
Yes.
could you just say for the village of Pittsburgh?
Yes, absolutely.
Because town,
Right.
yeah, thank you.
We can for Pittsburgh Village.
Yeah, Pittsburgh
Yeah.
Village, whatever, just so it's.
I love it when you guys
Right.
just say Pittsburgh
There you
Village,
go.
because
Right.
We do.
Village
We
of,
always,
it's redundant.
always we
And
say
then a couple
Pittsburgh
things, this last paragraph almost, I think, should be at the beginning.
Okay.
Because it says literally, the
Yeah.
four picture, this section is intended to, so you're talking about what it's intended to. So if you brought that up, also going back to what I briefly mentioned without any specific wordsmithing, but something to the fact that the intent here of the enhancement strategy is to take obviously all the existing, properties, if you will, whether they be business, institutional, or residential, to work upon that as a base, but then here again, review and make sure that differing impacts are balanced, basically. Somehow the residential, commercial institution, their impacts are recognized, reviewed, recognized, and accounted for in the code. You see what I'm saying? So it's
I
like
think that
you're
they do a little bit of that a little bit.
well, I'm saying,
further
but the
on.
intent is you're bringing it up in the front. So you have, the section is intended to provide guidance to the decision makers. And then part of that is recognizing the three different elements as a general, but they all have different impacts on each other, and the code and master plan will reflect that, and take that into consideration. That's just a general
I
thought.
like your idea of putting the last paragraph first, and every time I read the first paragraph, it's,
Yeah.
jargon isn't quite the right word, but it kind of talks in the built environment, it's not, we're relatively knowledgeable because we've been dealing with this, but other people in the village are going to read this, and things like the built environment or place-based are
And
not
that's, Jen,
in
that's
there.
what I was thinking with this
Okay,
thought
okay.
about, talk about, here again, the different residential, commercial,
Yeah.
industrial, and the whole partnership, if you will, and the impact on each other, and then the intent here is meshing them all together.
Excuse me, Susan has the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just paused.
I think since enhancement is a special term here, I think we need to talk about it right up front. What's being enhanced? And I think just as as we've been meeting time and again, I think that we should lead with the historical character. It seems like it's very often at the end, and I think what is enhanced is a good place to talk about the historical character. So that would just be a general comment I have about, leading with historical, but I think this is such a great term that that's an opportunity to
Absolutely.
really,
It speaks to
Talk
where we're
about
going
it.
more than development,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah, the focus
Yeah.
seems to be on development instead of
Yeah.
quality of
And
life.
so
and
the-
related.
so
And that's what
enhancement
we
is
talked
really-
about before,
Yeah,
but
it's
every
nice, yeah.
place, every chance to throw in the
That's right.
historic as a foundation.
And
Are
neighborhoods.
we good with that, or we can
Yeah.
move on?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
And
great.
We'll take.
Yeah, it's 5 to 7, just so you know. just
Yeah.
to
So,
kind
and
of-
one thing I'd like to kind of, and if I could, with tonight, we're gonna go through this when it is a complete draft with you at the next meeting as well. So, let's, if we could, we'll take all your comments, but more of the broad brush stuff that we can incorporate in, and then we'll have that second stab at it.
And give you your homework.
Yeah, and give you your homework moving forward with it.
So you're saying you don't want wordsmithing tonight, you want,
I mean, just,
broad
things like
comments
say,
and-
making
Yeah.
sure we highlight enhancement certainly makes
Right.
sense. But those smaller things, maybe we can.
Okay.
If you want to send them to us too,
And we can
that's
send you typos.
perfectly
and
fine.
Mhm.
Typos,
Things
all
like
that stuff.
that, or,
If you want to scan your pages and your thoughts, and that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
This page seems to be the perfect place. I'm looking at the last paragraph in the first column. It says, it should be noted that the village transportation network, streetscapes, trails, and canal fronts serve as the foundation of the community fabric. It doesn't mention neighborhoods. And I think neighborhoods are really key in our community. So that one paragraph says a lot, but I think
The reason it doesn't say it, and it doesn't mean we can't change it, is because we talk about all those things before it. So it was like neighborhoods, these are all important, but that doesn't talk about transportation.
it says it's a framework.
So that's why we
fabric.
added,
Right. This is, and maybe it's not clear, but this is more talking about the fact that the streets are what are have sort of cut and created
Right.
the development pattern of the village. Not necessarily. We're not stating that that's the end all be all of the village. More or less, this is where how people and cars and other things move in and through the village is really what creates that fabric and that ability to have established neighborhood areas, to have a downtown Main Street, to have all of those different things. So maybe we need to be more clear with that. I also have a feeling
wordsmithing, but not tonight.
that this section is also going to be changed a little bit as we add some of that connectivity element to the map moving forward.
So let's highlight that and just be thinking as we move forward. You're right, Jan, just to maybe take another look as we go along.
Okay, so one thing that we wanted to note as well, one thing that I have a big pet peeve of is just regurgitating plan recommendations from plan to plan to plan to plan. So we do reference the active transportation plan in here. Ultimately, obviously, we will reference the LWRP in some context. It is a little bit of an older document, but we're not going to take those recommendations and incorporate them in this plan. The comprehensive plan is obviously more broad in its vision, and so going for some of those active transportation recommendations, we try to hopefully direct you in that way.
yeah, we pulled a few
whereas-
as examples, and we
Okay.
just want to use them as illustrative examples, and there's 20 specific recommendations. We're not going to put all 20 in here. It just doesn't make sense.
Now, the other thing to note as well, and there's probably a better way to do this, but also so obviously there's a big difference between the community enhancement strategy map. It is not parcel-based, it's not intended to be parcel-based, it's not a zoning map, but speaking to the relationship between that, and I think maybe adding a note that, while this document was being, prepared, or as we were going through the planning process, we were also looking at the code.
Yeah.
So that provides a little bit more context there as well. So we have the map. Okay, So declaration of our design principles. The actual Secretary of Interior standards is probably in total, it's 100, I have a whole Word document of it. It's 122 pages. Obviously there is a lot of nuance in there that we're not necessarily capturing as a part of this document. But given the fact that we've talked several times about different areas of the village where a more of a preservation approach is necessary versus rehabilitation, restoration, reconstruction, we wanted to identify those, and we think it hopefully helps provide sort of that context right up front for each of those areas is what we're trying to do. The one thing that this doesn't provide for is new construction. Obviously, the rehab element is similar, but isn't necessarily direct in the SIS. So, any thoughts on these 2 pages? Just kind of, yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick thought, a question on the second paragraph, second sentence. Areas of the village have been designated on the National Registry of Historic Preservation.
What page are you on?
Page 60.
Page 60.
Second paragraph, second sentence.
Areas of the village have been designated on the National Register of Historic Places since 1984. Is there reference somewhere about the whole village being?
Well, and now
Historic
this near
preservation.
The rest of
the
the
entire
sentence.
village.
Pardon?
The rest of the
Just a
sentence, read
sentence.
on.
With recent approval to list nearly
Entire
to list nearly the
Mhm.
entire. So is nearly or is it entirely?
It is not
Yeah.
entirely.
Pardon?
Monaco isn't included in the.
It's not. It isn't entire. It isn't
No,
the
it
entire
isn't.
village boundary.
Okay.
Like Heather Hurst.
It's not
is in the airport
contiguous.
I'm just,
circle.
I'm just assuming.
Yeah, it's just not It's not
Yeah.
contiguous with the village boundary.
Okay,
So,
thank you for that clarification.
but also, I think that it's worth if you think it's worth. Maybe too busy to put it on the actual community enhancement strategy map, but showing that boundary somewhere in here
Right.
up front.
Uh-huh.
And,
Okay.
and the question is as a
Yeah,
historic
yes.
district, by whom? I mean, under the National Registry again?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
Secretary of
So,
Interior.
say
Did
that.
that
Yeah,
a
it's
few
right
years
under the
ago.
whole, the heading says the
They got
Secretary of Interior standards, so it's under.
Say it on the national.
The other thing that may be helpful too, out of the total number of homes that we have in our village, to say, X number is within the district, because a significant percentage.
Most of them.
Yeah, so I just think that also, just seeing numbers in addition to that map would help. Like out of 1,000 homes, 880 are designated, or, whatever.
Yeah, that adds up.
I think it might even be more than that, yeah, it's a
But
lot.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I'm not even giving anything
Yeah.
technically yet, so. Yeah,
Would you say 880?
Well, the wise guy here.
All right. Any other thoughts on these 2 pages? Yes.
One comment, the only standard we apply is rehabilitation standard, we don't apply the other 3. Preservation, restoration, and reconstruction aren't.
They're applicable.
They are.
They are.
Yeah, they
No,
are.
I mean, no property is said you have to, you're railing rocks on your porch, that the preservation standard would be you gotta get an identical one milled and made. The rehabilitation standard would be you have to get one similar, still be wood, but look similar to that.
You're at a level of what boards would say and what our codes say, but I'm telling you now that if you want to preserve your house in the village of Pittsburgh, you can follow the Secretary of Interior guidelines for preservation.
You
Now,
could-
because I have preserved part of my house and I've also rehabilitated part of my house. So, and I've also added on new construction,
Right. And
so I hear where you're going, but I think in terms of where we're going with this here, I don't know how germane that is.
well, the other thing though is that this is in the comprehensive plan. This is the guiding level. So we
Yeah.
do want to set the standard. If it does become the case,
Right.
obviously that it's more of a rehabilitation case moving
Right.
forward, that can be
Okay, let's
And
move
now
on.
there's a very small thing, legibility again, just to be.
Yeah.
On that
Can't
green.
read anything in the
Yeah,
any
it's
of
the bottom
these.
one.
Anything in the green is really tough to.
okay.
Is it possible to make larger print in the boxes?
Yeah.
Anytime you can enlarge anything and bold it.
Sure.
I mean, I think you're kind of getting the theme from the group.
Sure.
Make it bigger.
Sure. I'll make John proofread it all then.
Thank you.
Without his
That's
glasses.
enough.
Without his glasses. Without
You're
his
walking
glasses.
home.
Without his glasses,
Put
good.
on my magnifying
Oh,
glass.
God. Sure.
So the second element of this Declaration of Design Principles being SIS and the second being traditional neighborhood design. And this is really where we start to get that direction for the typology. So areas where either the streetscapes already are, very strong examples of what you want to see exist in the village, or in the case of like the North Main Gateway, maybe not so strong yet, on how you want to enhance that. Yes.
I have just a little problem with the design because it seems so planned when I think a lot of the village, a lot of older villages, it's a very organic development. And so I would like that to kind of reflect, the cow path that became a street. It wasn't all just, some design superimposed on the village. It kind of, it had a more,
Yeah, my house was a farm and orchard.
I think that's partially covered in diversity of housing.
No, kind of, but
You're saying
think of
that
Lincoln
we're-
Avenue.
No,
as
it's
a
not-
little more
it's
focused.
not,
Yeah, to
it's
move a
not
house.
just the
I-
housing, it's streets.
I think what we can do, and let me know if I'm
Uh-huh.
interpreting what you're saying correctly, maybe as a preface to this, because ultimately what we formally call traditional neighborhood development or traditional neighborhood design is really just trying to get back to the way things were done, the way things did happen organically over time, when we did have those more dense mixed, walkable mixed.
So what you just said, maybe
Well,
that's
then take
So
the
by
design.
putting that, the history of the village first, saying the village, its traditional
Organic.
development pattern happened organically,
Right.
created many of the elements that you see in traditional neighborhood design, so we want to see that continued moving forward, whether it's new development or redevelopment.
But also, kind of to Art and Jen's points earlier, I know that's traditional neighborhood design is a accepted concept, but enhancement is something new. So if it doesn't quite fit us or describe us, let's use a new term.
Like you don't want every house to all of a sudden have the same setback. The reason one of the houses on Boughton Avenue is only 5 feet from the fence and another one is 15 feet from the fence, if we start legislating that nobody who has 15, anybody who has 15 feet can't put anything closer to the road, then you've kind of lost
Well,
some
they're all
of that.
non-conforming lots.
I know, they're all non-conforming.
We're taking care of
If you
that.
start making them all
That's
conforming.
organic.
No, I think, so one thing, and one of the reasons why this is important, the same with the SIS, is for that developer or for that person who's looking to redevelop property and is identifying, I don't think we're prescribing anything here. I don't think we're prescribing one style. I think hopefully what we're trying to do is
You're describing.
to say, these are the elements, these are the building blocks of what make a great place. And we've developed those in some places organically over time as part of our history, and in other places.
Building blocks, organic over time. That's
Right,
great.
I think that's great
So,
vocabulary.
What we don't want to lose is this traditional neighborhood design piece, because that is an indicator
Yes.
for developers and for people looking to build.
What does the word typology? I don't know the definition of typology.
So more or less in this context, we're using it as a design vocabulary.
But I think the design vocabulary kind of comes along with, some connotations. And I'm just asking that let's start with describing Pittsburgh as accurately and as uniquely as we can, and not using kind of existing vocabulary out there, and superimposing that on Pittsburgh. And I think if it's descriptive enough, if it's accurate enough, then I think a builder or potential developer could get that.
I would say that local description happens in the forthcoming sections.
It's still included, but somewhere else.
That's where we try to talk
Okay.
about Pittsburgh's neighborhood, like this map that shows how Pittsburgh evolved over time.
Oh.
So that's where we try to get to Pittsburgh. The SIS is a national standard, and the
Right.
TND, we don't want to lose that because that's a resource. If
Mhm,
someone comes in
mhm.
and Googles that, if someone wants to rehab their house or build something or do something, they can say, oh, they like
So
traditional
this is a
neighborhood
framework that people can really just understand, plug into, and then now we're drilling
design.
down
Once you get
further
into
along.
each of the sections, you
Is
can
that-
tell us if we missed the mark. But
Okay.
that's where we're talking
Okay.
about
Yeah,
Pittsburgh
okay,
as
as long
a
as we're-
unique sense of place. and how it
So,
happened.
so one thing then maybe we need to make it a little bit more clear in these first couple of pages with the Declaration of Design Principles. This is the 10,000, 30,000 foot view of the different schools of thought that we are going to look at in each area. So if you notice, in each area we identify some approach through SIS. We identify, some of the elements of TND that are present or that may need to be rehabbed in some way to reflect this in the village. So we're sort of setting out these two very descriptive approaches in the beginning. And then maybe we need to be, I think, one, more explicit in front of this in identifying the fact that, we're not saying traditional neighborhood design created the village. We're saying that the village came
Yes.
before traditional neighborhood design and just happens to
Yeah.
have those elements already.
To that end, though, if someone's reading this, we could probably pull this room. How many people know about the Congress on New Urbanism?
Yeah.
Do we need a definition or maybe a
Too many
sidebar?
words that are.
Sure.
You know, do
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's
Some of that is, so again, and we'll work how we
Just
reference that.
some definition or some way to
Yeah.
describe why that would be important to be called out.
Because this is like language from
Yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's.
Somalia, a big question here on page 60 again, just literally the declaration of our design principles.
I'm sorry, page 60.
60.
We're going over here.
Declaration of our design principles. Would it be better to say it's a guide, these are guidelines? Getting back to, we don't want to be pigeonholed into, just the over, these are guidelines, and then you get specific areas, and then the zoning code itself.
I think a principle is big, though.
Yeah, I would say
Yeah.
that these are principles because
Yeah.
each one of these has its own set of guidelines. So we're looking at the whole school of thought of SIS and the whole school of thought of TND, and then the specific guideline as it happens to fall under that context in each area. But I think, as we're having this conversation right now, I'm
Right.
already seeing this visually structured a lot
Right.
better to help show that in the beginning right now, we're just
How we're pulling
this
it
is
out.
this is your intro. This is how we
Mhm.
built our framework. Now this is how we've applied it to every area.
Thank you.
Okay, so what page are we back to?
62.
We were on
We're still on
62.
62, or we're good, we're moving on? It's almost 7:15, that's why I'm just sort of
Okay,
calling up time here,
63.
folks.
Urban to rural transect, again, another element, and this is one of those things that obviously came about as a way to identify those elements and ways that communities have developed over time. We've adapted it essentially to fit the village. So these are actually called, T1, T2, yada yada yada. We can, and we've worked that in to fit how we've characterized some of these areas. Now it's not going to be clear cut, and that's on purpose. But it's as close as we could get.
What do you think this adds?
Hmm?
What do you think this adds?
So there's a difference in a thought process, and just like we talked about before, in how you treat that transitional area between residential and a place that starts to have more of that density. So if you have an urban center zone that's adjacent to your residential areas, if you're going from V3 to V5, what's your treatment in that transitional zone?
But isn't that more a development concept than it is a we're all built out concept? We're going to a few places we're going to make changes?
Yeah.
Maybe, and I don't know, this is a side-end thought. I think, Jen, your question, what is the value of this? I think
Yeah.
if I was a developer coming into the area or a resident, this gives me a general idea of what the village is looking for from a graphic point of view. So they're showing me, in this particular zone, this is generally what I'm going to have to be working from. I think it also gives the various boards, planning board, et cetera, a guidance on what each of these zones should be accommodating and how it's going to be accommodated, starting with the basic visual, and then here again, the code itself, giving the specific.
But
Does that sound right, Ellie?
But it does.
I mean, I found it helpful.
I mean, if you were a developer
Yeah.
coming in.
And that's what I read it that way.
Right,
So I
it's
think
development
versus
oriented,
a
it's definitely
citizen.
development oriented.
That's exactly, but that's, so these are for not only the citizens, but for somebody coming in, because as any community gets into a pickle at times, the developer comes in and says, oh, I read the code, I can do this, and then you get through the process, and it's problematic. Here you can say, well, here it is, let's talk it through, introductory, and then take it from there. So I think that's the intent.
And I think if the SIS speaks, and I'm just making this, I'm not making this up, but I'm
Sure you are.
I'm kind of not trying to pigeonhole, I'm going to say, but if the SIS speaks to residents a little more, great. TND speaks to residents and business owners more, and then this is more to outsiders. We've got, when we write plans, we write them for a wide variety of audiences. So our goal is that these will, between these 3 or 4 pages, anyone say, all right, I understand Pittsburgh's mindset.
I get the gist.
I get it, Pittsburgh.
And it,
I got it.
yeah,
If you
again,
leave somebody out, that's where you get in trouble.
this is one of those pieces that it's one of those things that helps us identify where your starting point is. So if we're talking about an area that's the rural zone, we have a starting point that says up front, you know, it's helpful, it's graphic, it says rural zone, these are the kinds of things I should be thinking about right up front, and then hopefully helps provide that context for the recommendations and language that comes after that. So with that jumps into the actual sections themselves. So I'm going to skip, just for my example, ag and parking, parks and open spaces, just because of the nature of them, they don't utilize all the information. What we've done in each section is provide a description of where, you know, how it's identified on the map, where it is on the map, what it kind of looks like, and then those elements that exist currently that help to establish that, whether it's the neighborhoods or Main Street or whatever, helps create a sense of place in that area. And then we have, you know, some other graphics and things for context. Each section, we identify the preferred SIS approach. We identify the transect zone, provide some contextual picture examples, and then some enhancement strategies. And these are intended to be things that are not like pinpointed to specific recommendations and things, but more or less are to-dos. Things to keep on your mind, or things to look to implement moving forward. And then following that, for every section, we will have those illustrative T&D typologies. And this is where those array of photos of things that are done well, things that may be done, you know, in some of these places, like we said, in the Gateway area, you know, we might have outside pictures examples. The Shane Place area concept, and looking at Village Gate and those examples. This would be a place where we can put that imagery and say, you know, why it is we've highlighted this, what it is we like about it, what context we think it might have within the village.
And some of Amy's, I wish she was here, some of Amy's thoughts on,
Can be plugged in.
that's where
Okay.
that would be great additions to some of these enhancement strategies.
Under enhancement strategies, the third bullet down, require sidewalks and complete street concepts. Do we need, again, another description or a definition of complete streets program?
Or do we just want to
Or do
refer
we-
to the complete streets policy, the existing village?
Yeah, or just
And that way-
somehow
Then
put
that way someone knows, oh, there's a
something-
policy.
Yeah, I just, you know, because it ends up looking like jargon that's thrown in and there's no context.
And then on the 5th bullet, it says, make pedestrian lighting and sidewalks standard on the residential streets. I wasn't sure if that meant the same on all the streets, or if that meant it's required on all the streets.
Required on all the
It's
streets.
So it's a standard design
Yeah.
element, standard design
But they
element.
aren't, the lighting won't necessarily look
No,
the same,
right.
but it will have lighting.
Correct. I think that's-
So that being said, with the time that we have left, you know, would love to get your thoughts, reactions, anything that stuck out to you as really like this, really like where it's going, or maybe we're not heading down the right direction. on each of these areas.
I really like the way you put the enhancement strategies in each section.
Great.
I thought a lot of them seemed very appropriate. You know, we can question words once in a while, but
Great.
it was helpful.
The
to
Northern
see that.
Gateway piece is our,
But that did lead me on at least one of them to say, gee, it looks like we've got 3 different things in this one area. I think it was the mixed density neighborhoods, I don't know.
I just want to make a note on page 64 in the first paragraph in the last sentence. You bring up the part of the town of Pittsburgh's purchase of development rights program, again, definition or some reference to that, or what a PDR is.
the green print.
Yeah, the green print, things like that that we're just referring to.
Mm-hmm.
And are we gonna, is there gonna be appendix here? Did we talk about that?
Not in the appendix,
There's
right?
going to be some definitions.
No, I mean, maybe
Oh,
not
yeah.
with this group, with our land group, and I thought,
Yeah.
because there's got a lot of transportation
Some other
plan, et
things
cetera,
that,
et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
You're adding it maybe in references, you mentioned in certain sections, but you might as well have, literally, if we're gonna have 100 different, have them there so somebody can find
A
that.
definition
So-
section?
Yeah,
And a
so,
definition,
so one thing that we could do, and that we had kind of kicked the idea around a little bit, is rather than extending the length and size of this document by including some of those things, go through and we can, as long as all of these resources are available on the village webpage, we can make Town of Pittsburgh Purchase of Development's Right program a clickable link.
Yes.
So that if you click that, it
Perfect.
takes
Yes.
you to the PDF that
Perfect,
reads
yeah,
what that is.
perfect.
As long
Active
as we
transportation
can
plan,
access.
click that,
So-
it takes you to the
Every
active.
and every time you have active transportation plan, you have that hyperlink.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Yep,
good.
we could do that. So now that's something that we would have to do when we're
Sure.
looking at the final,
Yeah.
the final document, and we're gonna need to work to make
Right.
sure that all of those resources are available, so we have the links,
Right.
to put in there, but yes. And the same, jumping, through the document itself, because, if you're
Right.
all the way down, in the mixed use and office residential section, and you see, preferred SAS approach, we can link that so it kicks you back to where that's explained.
Yeah, that would be very
Absolutely,
good.
yeah.
You need to be able to print both of those too, because people aren't going to walk around with their computer in their hand, going back and forth between things. People need to be able to print things that are connected.
Well, they'll be able to print the document. We can't print we can't
Yeah,
print.
they can print the document and
Yeah.
they're on their own,
Or they
Well,
download
go back and
we've
put
had
the
enough
link.
difficulty printing these documents that I'm really sensitive to
Mhm,
someone else
mhm.
who wants to use this being able to print it.
I don't know what to tell you.
You haven't had any difficulty printing the documents?
Well, in other words, you
Well, I
print a
think- I
document,
think
and
that-
also
that might-
printed copies always available in Village Hall to come in and, and you can read it online and, I don't know.
Okay.
Does anybody have any other thoughts on that? A printed document's a printed document. I don't know.
I think it's, when I read it, it's very hard for me to
But how
say,
else would you reference it then? You just,
Well-
this allows anybody to say, I wanna find that particular document, I hit it and it shows up on my screen. But how else are you thinking to provide that information to them?
if it's a living document, people need to be able to have it with them
No, I
and use
understand,
it.
but you can't, we're not gonna include, say, 12 different documents as part of this. Are you saying that? And that's
No,
all-
I'm saying that people might want access to those other
But that's where
documents, so
they
they
just
can use
click.
two things at the same time.
So they can click it, save it to the computer, as an example, if they don't wanna print it. Is that helpful? Because that's how I think it'll work for them.
Mm-hmm. Sounds right.
Anything else?
Back to, the North Gateway.
Yeah.
That seems to be our most critical area right now.
Mm-hmm.
How do you want us to, what do you want
Proceed.
us to do next? Yes.
Thank you, Peggy.
Printed big photos.
Yes, so do you want to go to the next steps?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean,
Yeah.
okay, I didn't know if you meant like in the actual document itself.
No, I know these guys want to be here a couple more hours.
Well, the one thing I would say, I mean, just overall, the way that reads and the way that recommendations are going in the right place? Yes? Okay. That's what I need to know, because if there's a lot of different land use patterns happening there. And so, we didn't want to broad brush the whole thing, but we do want to make sure that we're speaking to how we would want it to look moving forward.
I'm still having a little trouble taking this concept to the code level, but I know we've got a way to go with that.
We're still flushing it out.
And my one concern is are we going to be radically changing our codes or
Yes.
not?
Yeah.
Yes.
It depends what you want to say.
Rewrite.
It
Well, in
depends
that
what you
northern
want.
gateway, it's, you better do
No, I'm
something
not.
to
I'm
make a
saying
change.
our code labels.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, this will be when we get into it.
This is
Spoiler
all part of
yeah.
our innovative.
Spoiler.
Yes.
I know. I get it.
Spoiler alert: the community enhancement strategy titles look very similar to your new zoning district framework.
I have a feeling that was the case.
So
Remarkably similar.
Yes, and as such, the basic level of where buildings are set on a lot, how big a lot can be, how far the setback is, all of that stuff is that zoning district framework volume we have. The next step of that, which we haven't really gotten into in any detail, is taking all of the direction of the SIS, the TND, the Transect, and everything else, and putting that in the language of the design standards.
Correct.
Yeah. So those two pieces are going to be working part and parcel together the whole time to help implement what it is that we've identified.
If we pull this off, this is going to be great.
Mm-hmm.
When we
Yeah, no if.
Now,
Yes.
the big question, how do you, in either this whole comp plan and the code, treat pre-existing non-conforming uses? Do you actually want language in there? So here again, once again, I'm coming into the area as a development or a resident. I see all this and it says preservation, which I respect. There's a value to it. The community's great. But how is the village going to be treating my pre-existing non-conforming use if I want anything done at a high level? Do you actually have language in here then that could be used by the boards, trustees, and the code development saying, we recognize that there's pre-existing structures, there is a mechanism, whatever that is, and then somehow build it in. But I think it has to be addressed or at least acknowledged in here.
I would say so.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
Is that
but
question?
so my answer to that is a question to you, and it is how do you anticipate, how strict do you anticipate being in how you apply the vision of what you have for these areas? Because, so for example, there are places where you're going to have the corner, the building on four corners that's set back. Clearly, all the images that have been sketched and things that we've shown have shown there's a preference for that building to be up to the street.
Right.
So when they come in with a redevelopment request or whatever, how strict are you going to be with the request that be changed?
Right, so my personal opinion, and I've seen it, I've had that experience on both sides of the coin, I think that in general, if you're going to have a redevelopment, then you literally have to comply to the current code. If you have a pre-existing structure which you're adding on to or modifying or upgrading it, then acknowledgement somewhere that we recognize, the village recognizes it's a pre-existing non-conforming, and with that, there is a mechanism through variances that is, because we're recognizing this, we're pointing you towards there's a variance process, in that you, by saying that, you're saying we're sympathetic. I don't know how you draft that language, but number one, you acknowledge there's a lot of pre-existing, non-conforming. However, there's a mechanism which you can potentially, for renovations, enhancements, etc., that's completely separate and distinct from redevelopment, where you are now have to apply to current zoning.
Well, let me ask you this. So if it's just the statement of you have a legal means of recourse, I would leave that in the code.
Yeah, I think it's a code.
If you
Oh, no, I
It's on the
understand.
roadside.
If
No,
it-
no, I
if-
understand.
if the
but
group
to
said
explain
the
that
village
to-
is too easy or not hard enough on non-conforming properties and they're being willy-nilly about it, that would be something policy-oriented you could reference in the plan.
Right.
But if it's just a matter of there is a legal recourse to reuse this building, that's a code provision. I would just leave it.
So, and to follow up on that too, one of the goals of redoing the code, like for example, there are many non-conforming residential parcels
Right,
that
that's
don't need to be
They're all
non-conforming.
non-conforming.
You know, that though to reduce the minimum lot size requirement is gonna solve that
Mhm.
for a majority
So
of
that's
the
what you're
parcels.
working on.
Yes.
Simple
So
answer
we're
there.
going to, so ultimately the goal of the code is the things that are become non-conforming are the things that don't fit.
That are
in-
really
That,
non-conforming.
that don't fit
Yeah.
in the vision of what you have for the
Like
village.
that corner building.
So when a request comes forward, you know, say, all right, so it's not a redevelop, they're not tearing down the building, they're not looking to build something different, they want to alter the parking lot a little bit. It's an opportunity to come in through the code and say, well, you can't increase your level of nonconformity, but we'd like you to help develop a better street edge there, whether it's with a wall of screening or, you know, some other
Perfect. Yep.
element.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that
That's at
is,
least there's direction.
that's a
And you
code.
recognize it and deal with it,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely a code piece, but it does work well with.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, so based on this, now my wheels are turning.
Great.
See, that's where I get in trouble. Our initial thought was to have you send us comments on this document by the 11th, and then on the 20th, have a work session on some of the directional stuff. Because,
Of the whole
you know,
thing.
nor-
Our next
you know,
meeting.
yeah, like the Northern Gateway is going to require some discussion. You know, clearly we didn't expect to get there in a lot of detail today because Chris was here, we had a lot to introduce and a lot of good stuff to talk about. So our thought is to make it manageable for you is give us your comments and existing stuff by the 11th. I was going to let them off the hook on it if they wanted to, and then they gave us comments all at the end
Yeah.
after the 20th. That was where I was going to.
Yeah, so I would say if there's, you know, if there's burning thoughts or things that you just want to get to us wordsmithing, otherwise at least get it in front of our eyes, we will do our best to incorporate that into the full draft that we have for the next meeting. But then we'll ultimately, I think the better idea is to just let you react to the
This.
whole of this draft after the next meeting.
Will that incorporate the things we did the last meeting we did?
From, you mean from the, or the other document elements, like the other sections? No, not yet.
Well, the longer we go without incorporating,
Well, that's the way that the timeline goes. We aren't on track to have a full draft document until April. And then, and even then, we have April and May to solidify that document
Yeah.
before we go public. So this is, right now, this meeting, the meetings of February and March are dedicated to this section because it is, as you can see, one of the most important sections and one of the biggest lifts of the document.
starting to incorporate the things that we've come up with will make it not such a big job when we do it all at once.
Oh, I mean, that's certainly something that we've been working. I mean, we haven't forgotten that. We're still working on. We've been, started to incorporate the recommendations and comments that we had on the action plan and the policy framework and the community profile, certainly into that section. But one, to reformat all that, like we talked about, is going to take a little bit of time. And we want to make sure that we know what this section is going to look like so we can adjust the rest of the.
Okay, so, just to wrap this then, if you have pressing comments, get them in, but the goal is on March 20th that we're going to meet here 5:30, again 7:30, and kind of have a little more of the whole enchilada.
Yes.
And
Yep.
be able to really,
Just the land use. not
yeah,
the-
but all of this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just
That's,
this.
to me, that's an
section.
enchilada.
And we're going to jump right to the land use section.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Not
just-
saying
We'll just
That's
get
what I
into
meant,
it.
not- not
We'll
the
just get
entire-
into
we're
it.
not going to go in the
Yeah.
intro. We're
What
not
will we
gonna-
Yeah.
have regarding this?
So
other
those-
plan next time?
I think it's 2 times ago. I think it's like 2 meetings.
Yeah,
Right?
that's the feedback that we have tonight, and I mean, I don't want to speak for you, Chris, but the feedback that we got on that tonight, we're going to incorporate and then develop those additional supportive graphical elements, and that will be plugged into the draft plan, but I would not say in the next meeting.
Next meeting's gonna have all we've got to talk about this.
Mhm.
We'll start on it, because it's gonna take some time for Portland to start modeling things up, but we won't,
Yeah.
we'll just start working on it with this direction
Mhm.
today, but we really won't present.
So that'll ultimately probably be something that gets plugged in towards April when we have the piece all the rest of the document together.
Because if at the next meeting, if we don't pretty much come to, it's not speaking out for every other piece, but we really have to get through every land use section to keep the code on track.
Yeah.
So we don't want to spend a minute on concept plan, we don't want to spend a minute on community profile, we don't want to spend a minute on anything we talked about. We just don't have time, or the village board is, the moratorium's gonna start to stress us all out. So we need, this is what we've been building towards. It's been putting everything at bay to have this discussion next meeting. So we want to keep its focus on these 12 pages or 20 pages, whatever they are.
It's
Okay, great.
Good.
We're all set, huh?
Yeah.
Anything else you need to add?
No, that's it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Excellent.
Good job.
Yeah, it was a really good
Excellent.
discussion.
Very good.